It's just take it away when you're ready.
All right.
If people can wander in. But,
Okay.
yeah, we're recording now, so it'll be there for the start.
Well, thanks all for coming. I'm Richard Mosses. I've recently been appointed the program manager for the Photonics and Quantum Accelerator, which you may have heard about before under the name of the Place-Based Impact Accelerator Technologies in Central Scotland. So PQA seems a little bit easier to say than all of that. But what is the PQA? I guess the best. Well, the PQA and why it exists is fairly straightforward. I probably don't need to tell you guys that Scotland has one of the best groupings of photonics and quantum researchers globally. We have a large number of staff. We're bringing in a significant proportion of the funding compared to the size of the country in photonics and quantum, and consequently producing a significantly large number of papers per head. We have a great photonics industry. There's at least 70 companies at the last count, turnover somewhere in the region of 1.3 billion, and that's probably around about 10%, 7%, depending on which figures you're looking at for what the UK annual turnover is. However, it still felt that there is insufficient translation of the research, given how much is going on, into industry. So there isn't as much money being made per person in those companies, and the number of spin-outs and startups is significantly smaller than there is elsewhere, particularly in the area of quantum. So the aim is to staggeringly increase the turnover threefold by 2030. So in 6 years' time, we're going to increase to approximately 4 billion. So that's a massive undertaking, highly ambitious, and it's going to mean that we're going to have a significant step change in the co-creation of technology transfer into industry. And in order to enable that, we need to have much more people coming in with photonic skills into the marketplace. In order to meet this challenge, a large coalition has come together. Apart from 4 university partners, this includes, I think, quite significantly the civil services in Edinburgh, Glasgow, and West Lothian, where a large number of photonics companies are located. We've got technology transfer organisations like Fraunhofer, Census, and NPL, and of course people like Scottish Enterprise overseeing the whole thing because they're obviously interested in economic impact in Scotland. And the Glasgow Science Centre is supporting us in terms of our educational programme, which is part of what we're going to be doing. So, first of all, there's a large number here of different types of things that we're going to target. The main one is technology transfer projects, and that's what this call for funding and call for applications is all about, which we'll come on to shortly. But we've also got a good deal of public engagement targets that we're going to try and achieve. Principal among these is to teach 25,000 school kids about photonics and quantum. So working with the Glasgow Science Centre, we've got a learning pathway programme that's going to be launched hopefully in the new year. And that's going to encourage people to understand of what photonics is, what quantum is, and how ultimately these are going to be viable options as a career for these people as they grow older. There will be kits which will back this up. So that's something that's going to be in development over the next few years so that we can get those into schools so that there are things that will back up this educational pathway. And we also want to find ways in which we can get people into quantum and photonics who are maybe already skilled but haven't actually worked in that area. And beyond that, there's a much wider public engagement activity in which we will try and help people understand what is light, bring this to a much wider understanding and the public awareness of what quantum and photonics does for them on a day-to-day basis. So our first call for papers, we're calling this a pilot call because we're still trying to work out some of the kinks and how this is actually going to work. But the sort of things that we're going to fund taps into the themes that I've just been talking about in terms of our aims. So mobility, that's going to or bringing people from industry or other organizations to work on projects together. Commercialization entrepreneurship is helping people understand how they can set up businesses, giving them training in order to be more commercially aware and to have support if they want to create a spin out. And in terms of partnership and impact development, this is working with any number of people. It doesn't have to necessarily be a company in order to take your technology and transfer that knowledge into the benefit of the Central Belt in Scotland. And as I say, there's a big public engagement program. And one aspect I haven't spoken about already is in terms of equality and diversity and inclusion. How can we get underrepresented people involved in photonics and quantum technologies? So the sorts of activity directly that will be funded are fairly straightforward. You've probably seen these sorts of things before. They're not particularly unusual in terms of impact accelerator accounts. So we can help with prototyping. We can help with testing of your devices, creating demonstrators and proof of concept, that sort of thing. So that can then enable you to get further funding off of perhaps Innovate UK or other pathways. There's mentoring, helping you get contacts with industry, helping you work with industry, perhaps on internships or exchanges. And generally, what can we do to support taking your technology and moving it further down towards it being something that can be turned into a commercial or a public benefit? The big question is, what costs do we include? Well, general staff costs are included, subcontracting, travel is alternate. All of these things are covered as long as these are in line with your normal purchasing processes that are used here at Heriot-Watt. So this also includes consultants, and I think it's worth underlining this. You can buy small pieces of capital equipment, but the total value has to be less than £10,000, including VAT, and you can't use it as a proportion towards a larger purchase of some other item. It has to be a distinct feature itself, and clearly you have to make an argument for why you need it in your application process. The significant thing that is not included is full economic costing. So overheads, estates, that sort of stuff, that's not included. And the salaries of the COI and the PI are not included. Otherwise, general things that you probably would pay for otherwise are not the sorts of things that can be covered. So IP costs, that's normally something the university would cover. Going to conferences or publishing papers, those are the things that we don't cover. And if your impact activity is something that you've already written into another grant, we can't really provide additionality to that. We can do something that moves beyond that, but if it overlaps too much, that's not going to be something we can cover. So everything has to fall within these three essential criteria. First of all, quite clearly, since we're the Photonics and Quantum Accelerator, it has to be something that is photonics and quantum technologies. And those quantum technologies have to be those that are based on the use of light. If somehow you've got a quantum technology that doesn't utilize light in some way, and there are some out there, then this would be something that the quantum hubs or somebody else would have to fund instead. The other significant thing is there has to be some kind of impact here in the central belt of Scotland. So it has to either be working with a company or organisation, or you yourself have to be doing something within the central belt where the impact is going to be felt. If it's something that's happening in London or Cambridge or somewhere like that, that can't work. For this particular call, as I'll come back to in a second, only universities that are part of the partnership are involved. But in the future, universities outside of the central belt of Scotland who are not part of the partnership might be able to apply, so long as the impact happens here in Scotland. And of course, this has to be built on underlying research, which is part of EPSRC's remit. It doesn't have to have been funded by EPSRC, so you could have had a European grant or something else, but as long as it falls within EPSRC's remit, it's eligible. So what are we funding? Well, basically, the top line figure is up to £50,000 and 6 months worth of project time. We're anticipating maybe 6 to 10 grants. So in this first tranche, that probably would be about £300,000 total. And as I was just saying, only Glasgow, Heriot-Watt, Strathclyde and St Andrews can apply for the pilot call. So there'll be less competition in some respects, perhaps more close competition in other respects. But you're not competing against Cambridge applying, for example. Deadline's the 28th of June, so you've got just about 6 weeks to go. And you simply send the application form to the inquiries email. We're planning on having calls every 3 months. So if this one doesn't suit you, or you're not ready yet because you haven't got contacts in place to work on the other side of the project, then we should have another one along in about 3 months' time. Future calls will possibly be around specialized topics, and as I was saying, they could be open to all applicants, again, as long as the impact's in central Scotland. And where we'll be looking in due course at funding much larger projects. So these could be up to 2 years in length, could involve multiple partners, but we'll give considerable advance warning as to when those are going to be available. But it's worth thinking about, well, if I wanted a 2-year project, what would that be like? Because clearly we're going to have to fund that fairly soon in order for that to be put in place, funded, and completed in the 4-year term of the PQA as it currently stands. Basically, you can get further information, all the detailed information, all the detailed guidelines are at the website, photonicsaccelerator.ac.uk. You can also hopefully download the application form from there. I've personally found that for some inexplicable reason, Chrome on Windows won't download, but it will download on Chrome on anything else and any other browser on the planet, but not Chrome on Windows. If, however, you are still having problems, there's your local impact accelerator representatives who are working with us on this, or you can just email me directly and I can help you out with documentation. If you've got any further questions after today, you go away and you think, well, that thing's still bugging me, I'll better just ask about it. Feel free to ask me, or indeed your local impact accelerator representatives. So hopefully I've answered everything, but I probably haven't. So if you've got any questions, please just let me know. Thank you.
Partners for this call. So your slide there said the impact needs to be based in central Scotland.
Yes.
And have industrial partners from outside Scotland.
I guess that there is a case that could be made that someone outside of Scotland will lead to the impact happening in the central belt of Scotland is defined as some sort of big diagonal line going all the way up to Aberdeen and then sort of across down to Berwick or something like that. So it's quite more of a wedge than the central belt that we think of, the axis between Glasgow and Edinburgh. So if they were external to Scotland but doing something in Scotland, like they had a branch office or something like that, then as long as sufficient evidence is presented that the impact is going to happen in Scotland, then I think that would be eligible. But I'd have to see the application to really get a feel for what that was like. Safest bet is yes, if they're actually physically located in Scotland and therefore the turnover is going to happen and the employment is going to happen in Scotland, which is the key indicators that we'd be looking at, then that would be good too.
On the 6-month timescale, do you have a feeling about, are there any restrictions on when it would start and how it can end? And there are some overruns in terms of getting some aspect of the work done. Can it go an extra month or something? I mean, how are these boundaries defined?
As long as the thing finishes absolutely by the 31st of January 2028, I think you'll be okay. I mean, I'll be on your case on a regular basis, why aren't we making progress on this long before then? But realistically, it's going to be, let's say we get the applications in, we go through the process fairly rapidly in terms of getting a notification to you that an award is going to be made. It's probably January before you get started on the project anyway, because of getting the contract sorted out, particularly if there's an external partner. If there's not an external partner, because there doesn't have to be an external partner, then that could happen a lot quicker.
Right, okay, but there's no hard rule on when it has to start, when it has.
It's got to happen within the boundaries of the
Yes.
term of our funding.
Yeah, sure.
That's the hardest rule I can give you.
Do you know the timeline of the outcome announcement from the current funding call?
I don't have any definite figures. I'm still trying to put the review panel in place. My aim is to have an answer within a month. So you should have an indication by the end of July that you've been successful, or whatever other outcome might happen. This is my first time running it, but I'm backed by a team who've got a lot of experience of running this sort of thing over the past decade or so. Broadly speaking, I expect the review outcomes to fall into 3 categories. So there'll be those which we pass and we fund straight away without having to have any further discussion. There'll be those which are not fundable without any further discussion. And then there's going to be ones that fall in the middle, in which case we'll have to get the review panel together to have a chat about what we're going to do about them. So some of those we might give the benefit of the doubt and say, look, we'll give them the funding, we'll see what happens. Others, worst case scenario, I think in that middle category, we'll just say, look, we need to develop this idea a bit further. Let's work with either myself, my team, or your local IAA teams to try and make that a stronger application. Trust me, I need to. Overall, we have 3.5 million to give out over a total of 4 years. And given the timescales in which we've got to give that out, most of that's going to happen in the first 2 years. So I suspect our biggest problem is actually going to be how do we get the projects working and matched up and ready for funding. And my endeavour here is to get that money out. So anything that is worthwhile and viable and passes our criteria is quite likely to get funded.
So it's good that there's sort of different levels of funding now and coming forward. Is there any, I would hope there's no restriction if we say, let's do a feasibility study now, and then in 6 months or in a year's time, we can ask for a bigger part from this accelerator.
I would hope that that's something that we could do.
Yeah. So it's not excluding us from sort of.
The best of my knowledge, you're not only getting one bite at the cherry. You can. The whole point is to move things along, make them more fundable in other ways. Ideally, you'd get funding from us, and that would be it. But realistically, that isn't always going to be the case. And so, as you say, we do a feasibility study or a proof of concept or build the prototype, but then something else needs to be done to make it something that investors in a startup would be more interested in, and that's perfectly fine. There is also the Converge Challenge, let's not forget that, and other funding opportunities like Innovate UK as well, which we hope will be an ultimate route in which many of our applications end up.
Someone's asked, what's the earliest starting date for a project?
Well, basically, as soon as we can get all the contracts worked out. So my best guess is January. We could get it started earlier, but I would say, in your mind, probably best to think January. That's being a little bit pessimistic in terms of contracts, but we do have a lot of what they call it, research integrity tests that need to be done if there are external partners to make sure that they're not involved in nefarious practices. Now, I'm quite sure most of the Scottish companies are well known to our contracts teams, but the checks still need to be done, and that could take extra time. There's always arguments over IP clauses.
So in that, are you expecting to fund something in a company? Will they be receiving any funds?
I don't believe directly that they will. An application will obviously be strengthened if a company is contributing something to the project. If a company is being used as a test house, then through your procurement process, on behalf of the project, we could pay a company. I'm not quite sure exactly at this point in time how people like NPL and Fraunhofer might be involved, but obviously NPL is well known for its measurements and metrics. So I believe that's a service they'll be providing at a certain level, subsidized by themselves. But that's a conversation you'd have to have with NPL to work out how that's actually going to work. And obviously, there are other testing and metrics organizations that you might want to approach. If you're approaching, commercialization of a product, you might want to do electrical testing or something like that, in which case that would be a subcontract situation.
So it's clear that the broader goal of it, but just out of interest, do you expect any or many projects to not include industry partners, such as for like mobility just between academic groups, like earlier proof of concept kind of work?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's no obligation to have an external partner. I can't remember if I've already said this, but if you're a postdoc, you can apply as well. So it's not just established academics. There are two qualifications I need to make. Apart from all of this, your line manager needs to approve you doing it, and obviously your contract needs to run the length of the project. So if you're finishing in 2026 and your project ends in 2028, then that would be a difficult situation. But yeah, I mean, this hopefully will be a first step for postdocs to perhaps take on the opportunity to create a spin out in partnership with a professor or somebody like that.
And someone submit multiple applications for the call.
I wouldn't recommend it. I mean, there are plenty of calls coming up, so maybe pace yourself and do one now and one in the next call and one in the call after that. I'm not saying absolutely you can't put in multiple applications, but what if you win all of them by some strange circumstances? And at this time, I don't know what the balance of applications is going to be across the 4 universities, or how. I don't think we're going to sit there and say, well, we have to give one to everybody if someone submitted a poor application from, well, I won't name a university, just even by example. But if we only see one application from them and it was poor, I don't think we would fund it just because it was the only one we received from that university. But if someone has got that many top level ideas that they want funded, I'm not going to turn them away completely.
Someone online that's very keen to put in multiple.
Well, that's great. I'm pleased that people are brimming with these ideas and opportunities.
What's the what are the sort of review criteria? I guess they're not formalized. If I understand correctly, you're basically looking for economic societal impact in Scotland. That's essentially the prospect of doing that. Is that right? Or is there some specific criteria that need to be met?
I can't remember off the top of my head, but the criteria are available in the guidelines and in the core documentation. I think there are 5 or 6 key areas you need to meet, but that's within a much longer list of things that we're looking for. As you say, ultimately, proof that there's going to be some form of outcome and impact from the project, maybe not in the immediate future, but certainly looking ahead is going to be important. Having a good project plan will be important, including a suitable risk assessment. There's definitely some key elements where they're going to be looking at things like how you've considered EDI in the project and in the project team. And it's quite a rounded number of things, not just specifically how much is it going to cost and what's the outcome going to be. On the subject of EDI, I think it's worth considering how that's going to impact your team, how you can make sure that everyone in that team who are working on the project is going to be involved, and what needs they might have, and how those needs can be reflected in the application. So perhaps someone might need childcare provisions because they're going to be going out of the university to do some work with an industrial partner. So perhaps that's something that needs to be factored into the costs of the application, just by way of an example. Off the top of my head, but something, don't forget to include costs that support your team as well as costs for the actual project, like, consumables and stuff like that.
Anyone else? I have one question. I missed the first part. I got a question. Do you have any preference, for example, for photonics, quantum, or maybe the mixed?
No, not at all. As long as the quantum is based on light, it's applicable. And really what we're looking for is trying to just have positive acceleration of impact. So I have no concern about which particular technology area or application space that the opportunity falls in.
Thank you.
Maybe just a small point of clarification on a postdoc applying.
Yes.
Postdoc applies, they cannot cost their own salary into it.
Yes.
So it's better to apply with the professor. The professor is the PI and the postdoc's costs are costed in.
Well, they're presumably already on a contract and therefore are getting permission to do this extra work on the side if they're going to be the lead investigator. I think it's best not to look at it from the economic perspective, but look at it as the development of that individual and their career perspective. But yeah, in terms of numbers, sure. But then they won't be able to say they were the PI on a project and won't have the experience of applying for money.
It
And
could be a named researcher in that respect. It's just, I'm thinking about practicality in my own group.
yeah,
Postdoc employed currently on a certain project that's got a fixed deliverables and timeline.
yes.
If this is on top of that, that difficult to justify that.
That's why they need to seek your permission to apply as an investigator.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a tough one, but we want to try and help future people become either academics or move into industry, and leading on a project is a valuable opportunity for them, we think. Which is why I aren't excluding them, but we do recognise that practicalities of that is tough.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Richard.
Thank you. Thanks for coming.